The colony called New Horizons stood on a distant world many light years away from Earth. It was a place chosen for its rich soil, calm weather, and wide open lands that stretched under twin suns. The settlers had left Earth with hope, carrying dreams of peace and a new beginning. They built towns made of white stone and steel, planted fields of golden grain, and raised their children without fear of war or hunger. For many years the colony lived quietly, far from the politics and struggles of Earth. People worked the land during the day, shared meals in the evenings, and watched the stars at night. Captain Daniel Morgan had visited New Horizon once when he was younger. He remembered the laughter of children in the streets and the kindness of the families who welcomed travelers. He often spoke of it to his crew, calling it a jewel among the colonies. That was why the silence that came from New Horizon troubled him so deeply. At first, Earth Command thought it was a broken transmitter. Colonies sometimes lost contact for a few hours or even days. But this silence stretched on. Days became weeks and not a single word came from the colony. One night in the Earth Command Center, a signal came through at last. It was broken, filled with static and voices shouting in panic. Technicians worked to clear the noise, but only fragments could be heard. A woman cried for help. Children screamed. Then there was a sound like thunder and the signal was gone. The room went silent. Men and women who had spent years in service to Earth stared at the screens, knowing what such a signal meant. It was not a storm or an accident. It was an attack. Daniel Morgan felt a weight press on his chest. He could not forget the voices. He knew many of those settlers by name. He remembered their smiles. He clenched his hands into fists, fighting to stay calm. Around him, the command staff whispered in disbelief. Some still hoped it was an error, but Daniel saw the truth in the broken cries. New Horizon was in danger, and Earth had done nothing to protect it. A week later, scout ships returned from the edge of known space. Their reports left no doubt. The colony was gone. Houses burned to the ground, farms destroyed, the central town square filled with ash. There were no survivors. The scouts found only ruins, scattered belongings, and marks of weapons unknown to human design. Whoever had come had struck with precision and fury, leaving nothing alive. The scouts brought back images that showed the black smoke rising from the fields where children once played. Daniel Morgan stood before the council of officers when the reports were read aloud. His jaw tightened as the images filled the screen. He saw the school he once visited, now a shell of charred stone. He saw the fields torn apart by fire. He heard again in his memory the laughter of families now replaced by silence. He knew this was not an accident of nature. It was an act of war. On Earth, news of the colony's fall spread quickly. Families wept for lost relatives. People filled the streets with candles, mourning those who would never return. In small homes across the planet, parents held their children tighter, fearing that the same fate might one day come to them. Anger grew among the people. They asked who had done this and why. They demanded justice, but no answers came. Only the burned ruins of New Horizons spoke of the crime. Daniel Morgan returned to his quarters that night and sat in silence. He had commanded ships and patrols before, but never had he faced such loss. He remembered meeting a young girl in New Horizon, a farmer's daughter who had given him a flower during his visit. He still kept that dried flower in a book on his shelf. He opened the book and stared at it now, feeling tears in his eyes. He swore to himself that her memory and the memory of all the settlers would not be forgotten. He whispered their names to himself one by one, as though keeping them alive in his heart. At the same time, in the high halls of the United Earth Council, leaders gathered to discuss the tragedy. Some argued that they must wait for proof before taking action. Others said that to wait was to invite more death. Names of possible enemies were spoken. The Zilari, a race known for cruelty and conquest. Many believed it was them, but no one had yet found direct proof. While the council argued, the people of Earth grew restless. They did not care who was guilty. They wanted justice. They wanted to know their loved ones had not died in vain. Meanwhile, Daniel Morgan worked with his crew to study the scout reports. He stayed late each night, going through every image, every piece of data. He studied the weapon burns, the patterns of attack, the broken signals. He told his officers that someone had wanted the colony gone, erased completely, not conquered or taken over. It was destruction for its own sake, meant to crush hope. The thought made his blood boil. One evening, as Daniel walked along the observation deck of the command center, Commander Laura Bennett joined him. She was younger but strong, with eyes that burned with determination. She had lost a cousin on New Horizon. She spoke quietly to Daniel, saying that waiting for the council to decide would be a mistake. She believed Earth needed to act swiftly, to show the galaxy that humanity would not allow such cruelty. Daniel listened and nodded, knowing she was right, but also knowing that Earth was not ready for war. Still, the fire in her words struck something inside him. The stars stretched endlessly before them, cold and distant. Daniel Morgan looked at them and wondered how many other colonies were being watched by unseen enemies. He thought of New Horizon again, the fields, the laughter, the twin suns, and he felt his grief turn into resolve. Humanity could no longer live in hope alone. They had to be ready to fight for their future. As the days passed, more details of the attack came to light. Small fragments of alien technology were found among the ruins, shards of metal with strange designs. The scientists at Earth Command confirmed that these were not of human origin. To Daniel, it was confirmation of what he already knew. Humanity was not alone in its grief. Somewhere among the stars, another race had decided to strike, to kill without reason. The nights grew longer for Daniel. He slept little, haunted by the cries he had heard in the broken signal. His crew noticed the change in him. He spoke less, but his eyes carried a new sharpness. He told them that one day, Earth would rise to answer this attack, not with empty words, but with strength. He reminded them that the settlers of New Horizon had lived peacefully, harming no one, and for that they had been slaughtered. He said their memory demanded more than silence. When Daniel finally stood before the council again, he spoke with steady voice. He told them of the flower given to him by the young girl. He told them of the laughter he had heard in the colony streets. He told them of the screams in the last signal, and of the ruins the scouts had found. His words were not full of anger, but of sorrow and duty. He said that if Earth turned away now, the galaxy would see humanity as weak and helpless. He said that New Horizon deserved more than tears. It deserved justice. His words echoed in the chamber long after he finished. Some leaders lowered their heads, unable to meet his gaze. Others clenched their fists in agreement. Though no decision was made that day, Daniel knew a seed had been planted. Earth would not forget. And when the time came, Earth would answer. The story of New Horizon spread beyond Earth, reaching other colonies and even whispers among alien traders. Some pitied humanity, others dismissed them, but among the people of Earth a quiet resolve was growing. They would not live in fear. They would rise when the moment came, and somewhere, hidden in the shadows of space, those who had destroyed New Horizon watched and waited, believing humanity would remain broken. They did not yet know the fire that had been lit in the hearts of men and women across Earth. They did not yet understand that the fall of one colony would awaken a storm that could not be stopped. The news of New Horizon's destruction shook the entire planet. People no longer spoke of peace with steady voices. They spoke with anger and with fear. The streets of Earth's great cities filled with citizens demanding action. Candles still burned in memory of the fallen. But now hands also carried banners with strong words painted in bold strokes. Families wanted justice. Farmers, workers, and students all spoke with one voice. Earth must not remain silent. Earth must act. In Geneva, the United Earth Council gathered again. The great chamber was full, with leaders from every continent present. The air was heavy with grief and tension. Some voices urged caution. They argued that they still lacked full proof of who had struck New Horizon. They said a mistake could lead to war with the wrong enemy, but others spoke with fury. Commander Laura Bennett was among them. She stood tall, her voice firm, her eyes burning with emotion. She told the council that to wait was to betray the dead. She said that hesitation would invite more attacks. She reminded them that enemies respected strength, not silence. Captain Daniel Morgan sat in the chamber as well, though he did not speak at first. He listened to the debates, his hands folded tightly on the table. He watched as leaders raised their voices, as arguments turned into shouting, as grief mixed with fear. He saw the faces of families in the gallery above, people who had lost loved ones in New Horizon. Their eyes looked down with tears and with expectation. They wanted answers. They wanted hope. At last, Daniel rose to speak. His voice was calm but carried across the chamber. He told them again about the signal, about the cries that had haunted him each night. He spoke of the ruins shown by the scouts, of the burned homes, of the lifeless silence where once there had been joy. He reminded them that humanity was not a race of conquerors, but a race of builders and dreamers. Yet he warned them that if they refused to defend what was theirs, then no dream would be safe. He said the memory of New Horizon demanded justice and that Earth must be ready to act, even if it feared what lay ahead. Silence followed his words. Many council members lowered their heads. Some wiped their eyes. Even those who had argued for caution found themselves moved by his steady resolve. The decision was not final that day, but a shift had begun. More and more voices now spoke for action. More leaders turned their eyes toward war. Outside the chamber, the mood among the people grew stronger. Young men and women lined up to join the service. Factories that once built machines for farming now turned their hands toward machines for war. Families sent letters to Earth Command offering their support, their skills, their prayers. The name of New Horizon was spoken in every home. Children who had never seen the colony now whispered its name with respect, as though it had become sacred. The colony had fallen, but its spirit lived in the hearts of millions. Commander Laura Bennett worked tirelessly during those days. She moved among the training fields where new recruits gathered. She spoke with them, listened to their fears, and gave them strength with her words. She told them that they carried the weight of the fallen on their shoulders. She reminded them that every action they took, every hour they trained, every step they marched was not just for themselves but for the memory of New Horizon. Her strong voice gave them courage, and her presence made them believe they were part of something greater. Captain Daniel Morgan spent his nights in the command center. He studied reports, examined maps of the stars, and traced possible routes that enemy fleets could take. He spoke often with scientists and engineers, pressing them for faster progress. He believed that Earth would soon stand in open conflict, and he wanted no soldier to be sent unprepared. His crew watched him closely, noticing the new fire in his eyes. He was no longer only a captain. He was becoming a symbol of the grief and the strength of humanity. In one quiet moment, Daniel walked once more with Laura Bennett along the observation deck. The stars stretched before them like a great ocean, calm and endless. Daniel spoke of his fears, of the lives that would be lost if Earth chose war. He confessed that he did not want vengeance to turn into blind hatred. Laura listened, her voice softer than usual. She told him that fear was natural, but that strength came from acting even while afraid. She said that vengeance was not about hatred but about justice, about making sure no one else suffered as New Horizon had. Daniel nodded, knowing her words were true. Far away, whispers began to reach Earth Command from traders and scouts. They spoke of the Zolari, a powerful empire that had long ruled with cruelty. These aliens had crushed smaller worlds, enslaved weaker peoples, and spread fear across the stars. They had always dismissed humanity as a minor race, too distant and too weak to matter. But now, many believed it was the Zolari who had struck New Horizon. The evidence was not complete, but the style of the attack, the marks left behind, and the fragments of alien metal all pointed to them. When this news reached the council, arguments grew louder. Some demanded immediate war against the Zolari. Others said they must still wait for undeniable proof. But the people of Earth had already made their decision in their hearts. They no longer cared for endless debate. They saw the faces of their children and they saw the ruins of New Horizon, and that was enough for them. They wanted Earth to rise. Factories worked day and night. Shipyards lit the skies above Mars, where giant frames of battleships began to take shape. Workers moved with speed and purpose. Engineers designed new weapons, new shields, new engines, all meant to give humanity strength it had never known before. Recruits trained under harsh conditions, their voices raised in chants that echoed across fields and halls. Songs were written about New Horizon, sung by children in schools and by soldiers in their barracks. The name of the colony became a banner under which all humanity gathered. Captain Daniel Morgan was chosen to command the flagship of this growing fleet. The vessel was named Resolute. It was a ship larger than any Earth had built before, with engines that burned like stars and weapons that gleamed with deadly light. When Daniel first walked through its halls, he felt the weight of responsibility settle even heavier on his shoulders. He touched the walls with his hand, feeling the hum of power, and whispered a promise that he would guide this ship with honor. Laura Bennett was given command of the ground forces that would one day set foot on enemy soil. She trained them with unyielding strength, shaping them into soldiers who would not falter. She told them that they carried the memory of the colony within their hearts, and that their steps would echo across history. Her soldiers came to respect her not only as a leader, but as someone who shared their grief and their resolve. As Earth prepared, the galaxy watched. Other alien races heard of humanity's sorrow and their gathering strength. Some scoffed, saying humans were too young to challenge the great powers. Others grew uneasy, sensing that a storm was rising. And the Zilari themselves, far away in their grand halls, dismissed the reports. They laughed at the idea that Earth could ever stand against them. To them, humanity was a child playing at war. But Daniel Morgan knew differently. He knew the heart of his people. He knew their grief and their anger, and he knew their unity. He remembered the flower given to him by a little girl in New Horizon, and he knew that her memory now burned in every soul on Earth. He told his officers that the time was near, that Earth would soon rise not as a victim but as a force. He said the galaxy would learn the cost of striking against humanity. And so, as the days passed and the fleet grew stronger, Earth's people waited. They waited not with fear but with resolve. They knew war was coming. They knew lives would be lost, but they also knew that the fall of New Horizon had changed them forever. They were no longer only dreamers of peace. They had become guardians of their own future, ready to defend it with steel and fire. The memory of the fallen guided them, and their hearts burned with a promise that could not be broken. The shipyards above Mars glowed like fireflies in the endless night of space. Sparks flew as welders sealed hulls. Engines thundered in their first tests, and rows of soldiers marched through training fields on the planet's red surface. The air of Earth and its colonies was filled with one thought: vengeance for New Horizon. Each day, more workers arrived to offer their hands, more families donated their savings, and more recruits stood in line to fight. The galaxy had always thought humanity divided, but now grief had forged unity stronger than steel. Captain Daniel Morgan walked through the decks of the Resolute. The great battleship was alive with activity. Engineers rushed to finish last adjustments, while officers tested navigation systems and gunners checked weapon arrays. Every corner of the ship carried a sense of urgency. Daniel placed his hand on the cold steel of the walls. He felt the power beneath them, the beating heart of the engines ready to carry humanity's will across the stars. He whispered quietly to himself, a promise that this ship would not fail. Laura Bennett trained on the fields outside the shipyards. Her soldiers stood in neat rows, faces set with determination. They carried rifles heavier than any before, and their armor gleamed under the pale light. Laura walked among them, sharp-eyed, correcting stances, urging them to push harder. She told them that one day soon they would step onto alien soil. She told them they would carry the memory of New Horizon in every breath, and that the galaxy would remember their steps. Her voice was hard, but her heart carried grief like their own. Her soldiers knew she was not only a commander, she was one of them. The council in Geneva sent orders each day, but it was the people who gave true strength. Streets filled with workers singing as they marched to factories. Children collected scraps of metal for recycling, proud to help in even the smallest way. Songs of New Horizon were sung in homes and schools, telling the story of the lost colony and the justice to come. Humanity had turned its sorrow into a single purpose, and that purpose was now rising into the skies as ships of war. Yet even as preparations advanced, Daniel could not ignore his doubts. He stood many nights in the observation deck watching the stars. He remembered his words to the council that humanity was not a race of conquerors. He wondered if war would change them. He feared the cost in lives, the emptiness that might follow vengeance. But then he thought of the voices in that broken signal, of the girl who once gave him a flower, and his resolve returned. Some things demanded an answer no matter the cost. The first tests of the fleet came quickly. Patrol ships were sent to the edge of Zilari space, scanning for enemy activity. Small skirmishes broke out as human scouts met alien raiders. The reports confirmed what many had feared. The Zilari were preparing as well. They had seen the rise of Earth's fleet, and though they laughed at humans in their councils, their warships moved to defend their borders. The galaxy stood at the edge of fire. Daniel Morgan called his officers together in the command hall of the Resolute. Maps of stars glowed on the screen before them. He pointed to routes of attack, to weak points in the Zilari defense. He told them they must strike quickly, not waiting for the enemy to come to Earth. He said the Zilari believed humanity weak, and that belief was their shield. That shield must be broken. His officers listened in silence, their faces stern. They knew the weight of his words. They knew war was no longer a distant talk, but a reality just beyond the stars. Laura Bennett joined the meeting, speaking of the ground forces she had shaped. She described their readiness, their loyalty, their will to fight. She told Daniel that these soldiers did not fear death, because they carried something greater, the spirit of a people united. Daniel looked at her and saw not just a commander, but the heart of humanity's resolve. He felt pride and also sorrow, knowing many of those soldiers would not return, but he said nothing of it. Instead, he nodded and spoke of the battles to come. The day came when the fleet was ready. Rows of battleships lined the black sea of space, their engines glowing, their weapons armed. The Resolute stood at the center, proud and unyielding. Daniel stood on the bridge, his crew at their stations. Silence filled the ship as he gave the order. Engines roared and the fleet moved forward, leaving the orbit of Mars, leaving the safety of Earth. They crossed into the unknown, into the shadow of war. The first strike was against a Zilari outpost near the border. Human ships emerged from the void with precision, weapons fired in unison, cutting through alien defenses before they could fully respond. The Zilari had believed the humans slow, clumsy, unprepared. They learned differently that day. Daniel gave orders with calm clarity, his voice steady even as the battle raged. The Resolute led the charge, breaking the outpost's defenses. Laura Bennett's forces landed on the surface, storming the alien bunkers. Her soldiers fought with fierce resolve, their shouts echoing through corridors of steel. Within hours, the outpost fell. Humanity had taken its first step. The victory sent shock through the galaxy. Traders and messengers carried tales of human ships burning with vengeance, of alien soldiers fleeing before them. Many races who once dismissed Earth now spoke of them with caution. The Zilari, proud and cruel, felt insulted. They promised revenge, swearing that humanity would be crushed. But Daniel knew their pride would blind them. He told his officers that arrogance was the enemy's weakness, and they must strike again before it faded. In the days that followed, more battles came. Human fleets cut through Zilari patrols, destroyed supply lines, and captured strongholds. Each victory carried a cost, but each also carried a message. Humanity was no longer a child among the stars. Humanity had teeth, and it was not afraid to use them. The soldiers of Earth raised their banners on alien soil, planting them where once the Zilari had ruled with fear. Songs of victory joined the songs of sorrow, blending into one voice of defiance. But with victory also came heavier burdens. Daniel walked the halls of the Resolute at night, seeing the tired faces of his crew. He read the lists of the fallen after each battle, whispering their names as he once whispered the names of the settlers. His heart grew heavier with each page, but he did not falter. He told himself that their sacrifice built the shield that would protect Earth. Laura, too, carried the weight. She comforted her soldiers, stood at the side of the wounded, and sent letters to families back home. She bore her grief in silence, showing only strength to those who looked to her for hope. As the fleet pressed deeper into enemy space, the resistance grew. Zilari fleets gathered, larger and stronger. Battles stretched longer, bloodier. Humanity's unity was tested but not broken. Daniel and Laura stood at the front, leading by example, never asking their soldiers to do what they themselves would not. Their presence became a light in the darkness, guiding their people forward. In the council halls of Earth, news of each victory was met with cheers. Families wept for the fallen but lifted their heads with pride. The name of New Horizon was spoken not only in grief but in triumph. The colony had been lost, but it had become the fire that drove humanity to rise. Children in schools now drew pictures of ships like the Resolute, calling them protectors. The galaxy had underestimated Earth, but Earth was teaching them all a lesson written in fire. Daniel Morgan knew the war was far from over. He knew greater battles still waited, and that the Zilari would not surrender easily. But as he stood on the bridge, watching the stars beyond, he felt the strength of his people behind him. He felt the weight of their grief, their anger, and their hope. He knew that vengeance was not yet complete, but it was coming, and when it came, the galaxy would never forget. The war pressed deeper into the stars, and Earth's fleet carried its vengeance like a storm. Where once the galaxy thought of humans as dreamers, now it began to fear them as warriors. Captain Daniel Morgan stood at the front of it all, his face calm but his eyes heavy with the weight of lives lost. Commander Laura Bennett stood beside him in each campaign, leading ground forces with fierce resolve. Together, they shaped humanity's answer to the tragedy of New Horizon. The fleet had already struck several outposts, tearing through Zilari defenses. But now they faced something greater, the core of the enemy's power. Intelligence spoke of a stronghold where fleets gathered, where the Zilari built their ships and trained their soldiers. It was not only a military target, but a symbol of their strength. Daniel knew that if Earth could strike it down, the galaxy would tremble. Yet he also knew the cost would be high. The fleet gathered at the edge of enemy space. Dozens of ships floated in silence, engines burning faint blue against the dark. Inside the Resolute, the crew moved with quiet focus. Daniel walked the bridge slowly, his hands behind his back. He spoke calmly to his officers, reminding them that fear was natural, but courage was a choice. He told them they carried the hopes of billions and that failure was not an option. His words were not shouted, but they carried power. His crew answered with steady voices, promising they would not falter. Laura stood among her soldiers in the hangar. The ground troops prepared their weapons, adjusted their armor, and shared brief words with one another. She walked between them, speaking softly, calling each by name when she could. She reminded them of why they fought, not for conquest, but for the memory of families lost in New Horizon. She told them that every step they took was for those who could not take another. The soldiers nodded, their faces hard, their hearts steady. They trusted her and they trusted each other. The attack began with silence. Human ships slipped from the void like shadows, their engines dimmed. They drew close before the Zilari even realized the danger. Then the first volley of fire roared. Light streaked across the dark, weapons burning with the fury of Earth. Explosions lit the stronghold as defenses scrambled to answer. The Zilari ships poured out in swarms, their pride now turned to desperate resistance. On the bridge of the Resolute, Daniel gave orders with calm clarity. He directed the fleet with precision, turning what seemed chaos into deadly harmony. Human ships moved like parts of one body, covering each other, striking with focus. The Zilari fought with strength, but their arrogance had left them unprepared for an enemy that struck with both rage and discipline. One by one, their ships fell, torn apart by human fire. On the ground below, Laura led the charge. Dropships burned through the atmosphere, landing amid fire and smoke. Her soldiers stormed into bunkers and towers, their voices carrying through the halls. They fought not with hatred, but with unbreakable purpose. The Zilari soldiers, used to terrorizing weaker foes, now faced enemies who did not run. Laura moved among her troops, rifle in hand, shouting commands and lifting spirits. When one of her soldiers faltered, she was there to pull them forward. When walls rose before them, she found the path through. Her presence turned fear into strength. Hours passed, and the battle raged across space and ground. Ships burned, soldiers fell, the air filled with smoke and screams. Yet through it all, the humans pressed on. Daniel felt each loss like a weight on his chest, but he did not allow it to break him. He whispered the names of the fallen as the reports came, then turned back to command. Laura carried the wounded with her own hands when needed, refusing to leave anyone behind. Their leadership kept the heart of the fleet beating. At last, the stronghold began to fall. Fires spread through its towers, its defenses broken, its ships scattered. Human banners were raised where once Zilari symbols had stood. The enemy fled in disarray, their pride shattered. Victory belonged to Earth, but victory came at a cost. Rows of human soldiers lay still among the ruins. Ships that had flown proudly now drifted silent, their crews gone. Daniel stood on the bridge, his eyes on the lists of the dead. He read each name aloud, refusing to let them be forgotten. His crew listened in silence, tears in their eyes, knowing their captain carried their grief with his own. Laura knelt among her soldiers, holding the hands of the dying, whispering promises that their sacrifice was not in vain. Her voice trembled, but she did not let them see her break. When the smoke cleared, the stronghold lay in ruins. Humanity had struck a blow that would echo across the galaxy. News of the battle spread swiftly. Races once indifferent now watched with wide eyes. Some whispered that the age of the Zilari was ending. Others feared that humanity itself might rise too far too fast. But in the hearts of Earth's people, the victory was not about power. It was about justice. It was about keeping a promise to the lost colony. Daniel knew this was not the end. The Zilari still held many worlds, still had fleets and armies. They would not surrender easily. But he also knew they had been wounded deeply. Their arrogance had been broken, their fear had begun. Humanity had shown that it would not bow, that it would not remain silent in grief. It had answered with fire. That night, Daniel walked alone through the quiet halls of the Resolute. He stopped at the small cabin where he kept the flower given to him by the girl of New Horizon. He looked at it long, the petals now faded but still precious. He whispered to her memory, telling her of the victory, telling her that her home had not been forgotten. He swore again that the war would not end until justice was complete. Laura stood with her soldiers in the camp they had built on the ruined stronghold. She listened as they sang quietly, voices rough but filled with pride. She felt both sorrow and hope. She knew more battles would come, but she also knew that their strength would not fail. She closed her eyes, hearing the voices, and let the sound carry her heart forward. The stars above shone cold and distant, but now they seemed less empty. Humanity was no longer only a visitor in the galaxy. It was a force, a people who had risen from loss to claim their place. The memory of New Horizon burned brighter than ever, a light that guided them through the darkness. And as the fleet prepared for the battles still to come, Daniel and Laura knew they carried not only vengeance but also the future of their people. The galaxy had witnessed the fall of the Zalari stronghold. Human ships now patrolled the space they once feared, and the ruins of alien cities burned beneath their engines. Captain Daniel Morgan stood on the bridge of the Resolute, staring into the darkness beyond, his eyes reflecting both sorrow and determination. Commander Laura Bennett prepared her ground forces for the next phase, knowing that the battle was not yet complete. The victory had been great, but the war still stretched before them like an endless shadow. Reports from scouts reached the Resolute each day. The Zalari scattered across distant systems, attempting to regroup, but their morale was broken. Ships moved without order, fleets lacked coordination, and soldiers who once fought with pride now fled at the sight of humans. The galaxy had underestimated Earth, and now it was paying the price. Yet Daniel and Laura knew better than to celebrate too soon. The enemy was still powerful, and complacency could cost lives. Earth itself stood united as never before. The news of victories reached every home, every city, every colony. Families wept for those lost, but they also held pride for the courage of the fleet. Children learned of the battles in schools, hearing the stories of bravery and sacrifice. Statues were erected to honor the fallen of New Horizon and the soldiers who had followed in their memory. Songs of grief had turned to songs of hope, and humanity's voice echoed across the stars. Daniel called his officers to the bridge for the final planning. Maps of the Zalari territories were displayed, showing their remaining fleets and colonies. He pointed to the last significant world still under enemy control, a planet rich in resources and strategic value. "This is where the war ends," he said. "If we take this world, we show the galaxy that Earth will not be threatened, that New Horizon's fall was not in vain." His officers nodded, their faces set with determination. Laura joined him in the planning, detailing the ground assault. She explained the layout of the enemy's bases, their defensive measures, and possible weak points. Her soldiers were ready, trained, and motivated. She reminded the officers that the humans were not only fighting for themselves, but for every life the Zalari had destroyed. Daniel watched her, admiring the strength she carried. They were different from the enemy. They fought not for conquest but for justice. The fleet launched, engines glowing blue against the dark void. Ships moved in formation, precise and unyielding. Human firepower struck first, disabling orbital defenses and breaking the enemy's lines. Zalari warships rushed to defend, but the humans had learned from every battle. They moved with coordination, covering each other, striking with deadly accuracy. The Resolute led the charge, and Daniel gave orders calmly, each one precise, each one carrying the weight of lives depending on it. On the planet below, Laura's forces descended in dropships. Smoke and fire filled the air as her soldiers moved forward. They fought with unwavering courage, advancing through enemy bunkers and communication centers. Laura moved among them, directing, encouraging, and fighting alongside them. The Zalari resisted fiercely, but the humans would not falter. Step by step, they pressed forward, reclaiming the world for justice and for the memory of New Horizon. Hours passed. Battles raged in space and on the ground. Ships exploded, soldiers fell, and fire spread across cities. Yet humanity pressed on, united in purpose and guided by memory. Daniel's heart ached with each loss, but he reminded himself of why they fought. He whispered the names of every fallen crew member, every soldier, every innocent from New Horizon. Their sacrifice became the fuel that drove him forward. At last, the Zalari's main base fell. Fires consumed the structures, and human flags were raised over the once proud symbols of the enemy. The remaining fleets fled into the void, broken and leaderless. Humanity had struck a final decisive blow. Daniel stood on the bridge of the Resolute, looking out at the ruined world below. He felt a quiet sorrow mixed with pride. The cost had been high, but justice had been served. Laura walked among her soldiers, tending to the wounded, comforting the terrified, and giving orders to secure the area. Her voice, though tired, carried strength. She reminded her people that they were not conquerors but protectors, and that their fight had preserved lives that might otherwise have been lost. Her soldiers listened, inspired not only by her words but by her example. As the fleet regrouped, Daniel and Laura shared a quiet moment. The stars above were calm, but they knew the echoes of war would linger for years. They spoke not of glory but of duty fulfilled. Daniel thought of the flower from New Horizon, still pressed in his book. He realized that it symbolized more than memory. It was a promise, a reminder that even in loss, humanity could rise. Laura nodded, understanding the unspoken truth. Vengeance had been served, but it was the unity and courage of their people that had truly won the day. Back on Earth, celebrations were tempered with remembrance. Families mourned the fallen but honored their courage. Statues were unveiled, songs were sung, and stories of bravery were told in schools and homes. New Horizons' memory became a symbol of both loss and resilience. Humanity had been tested and had risen stronger. The galaxy would remember this day, not just for the fall of the Zalari, but for the strength of a people united by grief and determination. In the quiet after the war, Daniel walked on the Resolute's observation deck. The stars stretched endlessly, but now they seemed less cold. He thought of every life lost and every victory gained. He knew the galaxy was vast, filled with both danger and hope. He understood that humanity's journey had only begun. But for the first time in many months, he felt a measure of peace. The memory of New Horizon had been honored, justice had been served, and Earth had shown the galaxy the strength and heart of its people. Laura stood beside him, gazing at the stars. She reflected on the journey, the battles, and the sacrifices. She thought of the soldiers who had stood beside her, of the families who had lost loved ones, and of the promise that had driven them all forward. She realized that their vengeance was not about hatred, but about protection, about making sure that no other colony would fall like New Horizon. The stars above no longer seemed distant and unreachable. They now seemed like a place where humanity belonged, where their courage and unity would be remembered for generations. As the fleet returned home, Daniel and Laura knew that the future held challenges, but they also knew that humanity was ready. They had learned the true power of unity, the strength that comes from standing together in grief and determination. New Horizons' memory would never fade, and the courage of Earth's people would continue to shine as a beacon across the stars. The galaxy had seen the rise of humanity, and it had been unstoppable. Even in the quiet that followed, the story of the fallen colony and the vengeance that honored it would live on, guiding humanity forward into the endless night, ready for whatever came next.